Talofalava and welcome everyone to another live digital conversation here in the Polynesian Eyes podcast. It's been about a week and a half. It's been a long week and a half, 2 weeks here in South Central Texas. I've spent a lot of time on the road last couple weeks and also got a little sick and, was in Ohio, was in Pennsylvania, also spent some time in North Carolina. And through the travels, somehow, I don't know if it's the cold weather up north, man, but I came back with the plague. Been struggling with it for probably just over a week now. And unfortunately, my whole household is slowly recovering from the sicknesses. But thought it was important that we jump on here and have a live. It's been about a week and a half since we've had one. And, once you get out of a habit of doing something, you just stop doing it. So gonna look forward to continuing here. As everyone may know, we are running live here on Facebook, YouTube, Patreon, on X, and last but not least on Instagram. So we'll continue to run these live sessions. We typically try to shoot for at least one live a week. Also, just as a follow-up on some of the episodes that we have running online, we do have the part 3, the final part of Siausi Ilayu. That'll be coming out this coming week. Just haven't had the opportunity to push out the final episode that we had with Siausi Ilayu, and it's been a great episode or series of episodes we've had with Siausi. Really learned a lot, had great discussions, and really the feedback from the viewers have been fantastic from that interview. Also, Tevita Fale is back in Hawaii. We're working to kind of just finalize some of the details to make sure he has the equipment there so we can continue our episodes with him. The next topic on the docket that we're having with Tevita Fale is walking through all the Tu'itonga settlements and kind of covering where those settlements happened, some of the Tu'itongas that lived in those specific settlements, and major events. And as we have covered, I think there's an 8 series article that Tevita Fale has on his website, thfale.com, thfale.com. You guys can go check it out. He has a whole list of articles there going over a variety of topics from Tu'itonga history, some of the customs, the Polynesian Empire, and the astronomical knowledge and information and his research that he's had throughout his career there. Hey, T-Style, malo. T-Style says, Sio Fatua, take care and hope the family gets better. Malo, malo, T-Style. Yeah, it's been interesting. My voice is slowly coming back. I'm not sure if it was, something respiratory, but it was pretty rough, but I appreciate it. Malo, Vito, T-Style. And thank you for stopping by. So I was we're a little behind. So coming back, so Tevita Fale, we're gonna have that Tu'itonga settlement series coming through. We also have a couple other guest interviews that we're scheduling. One of them is a recommendation from the viewers. We also have some Polynesian influencers and people associated with Polynesian content on social media that we'll be having invitations out to join us on the podcast just to have a discussion and have a talanoa session here on the live digital kava session. What we have on the docket today is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to continue with our series of William Mariner with Kava University. We're a little behind on that series. So that's what the episode today is. We're going to watch through another episode. It's chapter 4, part 1 on the Mariner's journey. This is great content that Lolo Tuyaki or Kava University has online. We're going to walk through his YouTube series on it. And that's what we'll do. Actually, we'll jump right into it. Make the switch here, bring it to the screen. We'll go full screen and we'll jump into it.
Chapter 4. I'd like to welcome everybody back. Happy New Year. Merry
Just to double check, if you guys can't hear the video, let me know. Every once in a while we have technical difficulties, so if you don't hear the video, give me a heads up in the chat. Mahalo.
Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and whatever else. Since the last time we met, sorry it's been a while, but we're back and I'm gonna try to keep going. Let's just keep going through the story. We're on chapter 4 now. Just a recap of chapter 3. Tuponiwa is the high chief in Vava'u now. Right, Vuna left is Tuponiwa. Comes down with all of his canoes and his warriors down, and they stop by.
Just as a reminder for a lot of the viewers, this was something that we discussed a little bit on the previous episode, if I remember correctly. I find it interesting that after Ulukalala and Tuponiwa assassinate the Tuikanukupolu, when they come back, they are met by certain resistance in Ha'apai, but many of them flee to Samoa when Ulukalala and Tuponiwa come back after the assassination. So I find that a little interesting that a lot of these quote-unquote nobles leave Vava'u and Ha'apai and don't go to Tongatapu, but they go to Samoa for refuge. There's a couple, ideas that came to mind as why that was the case. Obviously, with the Tuikanukupolu coming into running the administrative state, they not only import a lot of support from Ha'amoa to come to Hihifo on Tongatapu, but there could be a real, just from looking at how people behave when there's war and there's chaos, the fact that many of these quote-unquote nobles or ho'ekis retreat to Ha'amoa brings a couple things to mind. Number one, they're not going to where there is support for the Tuitonga and the Tuihatakalaua on Tongatapu, even though for all intents and purposes it is the same family, but there is more security in their mind to go to Ha'amoa. So that kind of makes me also think, they don't see a huge separation between Ha'amoa and Tonga. And we bring this comment up many times on the episode. We have these delineations between Tonga, Ha'amoa, Tahiti, Tuvalu, Wallis, Futuna that exist today because of colonization. But as we can see from the behavior of this account of the people in there, it was almost like going from one village to another. Going from Ha'apai, Vava'u, and going to Upolu or Savai was like going to another village or another part of the Polynesian nation. Because the concepts of Tonga as a quote-unquote separate independent nation, Samoa, American Samoa, French Polynesia, Fiji, these lines did not exist. And so this kind of reminds me of that discussion that we had, is as we observe how people are behaving in these accounts, it gives us some insight or at least some idea of how people perceived other islands, right? And how they interacted with each other and the relationship amongst the people in those islands. And one thing real quick before we jump back to Lolo's commentary here is Captain Cook, I think, was the first one to identify Polynesians as a nation. And it intrigued Captain Cook significantly that he said, I don't understand how this nation, he was pretty much referring to Polynesians, they spoke the same language, had many of the same religious beliefs, and also had the same culture and political structure in many ways, were similar across the different islands. He saw it as a nation, people behaving and acting like a nation would. So, we're hundreds of years drawn away after that, thousands of years from the Tuitonga Empire being in full effect throughout Polynesia. But once again, this is why it's kind of cool to walk through this and observe how people are behaving, because it can give us some ideas on how to understand the relationships that our ancestors had with each other in the Pacific and especially in Polynesia.
And pick up canoes and warriors from Ha'ano, Foa, and Ha'apai, Rifuka, and they're in Uiha. And by the time they get to Uiha, they go to Pagaimotu, in the Pagaimotu, which is about a mile away, just north of Nuku'alofa. They go to Mount Fanga and they do the whole ceremony of the tuki at Finau Ulukalala's dad's grave. And then they go back to the beach, they prepare for war, and then they head to Nuku'alofa, which they can see. Remember, they were doing war cries at Nuku'alofa, the Nuku'alofa warriors, and now the Ha'apai Vava'u warriors. When they get into their boats to go, their canoes to go to Nuku'alofa, there's 170 canoes, right? 4 of the giant canoes, the mini cannons were in, right? They mounted them on these mounting
179 canoes. For all intents and purposes, this is a massive fleet, and this is in a time of decline in Tonga. I mean, we're getting to the point here where we're at the height of the Tu'i Empire. You're looking at hundreds of canoes traveling at some point with potentially thousands of people in an army of thousands of people. So that's something really interesting that, just in this timeline, 179 canoes, you go back to a unified Polynesian nation under the Tu'itonga, it's not very difficult to see thousands and thousands, an army of thousands and thousands, and canoes in the hundreds and hundreds, and who knows, maybe close to 1,000. Just coming back here, Clydemore says, Malo taulava tua, Happy New Year, Toko Malo. Clydemore, welcome. Happy New Year to you and also to everyone on joining in. Appreciate it, Clydemore. Good to see you, Toko.
things with wheels and they can push them. And they get into Nuku'alofa, right? So Fidau's entire fleet now pulls into Nuku'alofa, and Mary said that there were 15 palangis that were with him, Englishmen. Now we talk about wars, or if you heard about wars or warriors going at it, you don't hear that 15 palangis were at any of these wars, right? Mariner said there was 15 Englishmen, which means there was a lot more than people think that were spared from the Port-au-Prince that anybody thought, right? And
yeah, that's something I want to comment on that real quick about the fact that there were multiple Europeans there, and there could have been more saved from the Port-au-Prince. Have a comment here from Pound for Pound Entertainment, Malo Toko, or Uso, Boso, whatever, joining in. That's why colonizers don't mention it. I would agree with that. Pound for Pound, it doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't fit, their perspective of what our ancestors could have achieved. But that narrative is slowly dying out, because the more we talk about our history, the more we observe it, the more we pay attention to what our ancestors were able to accomplish, that, you can only ignore something for so long. And anyone with an open mind and willingness to seek for the truth, you observe, you ponder, and it's pretty soon things become pretty straightforward and obvious. Additional here, because they were dumbfounded, they seen it at 100%, right? I mean, there's so many accounts of Western explorers totally being outmaneuvered, right? Not just speed, but outmaneuvered and in skill of their ships, and also obviously navigational and knowledge of the area as well. So really kind of interesting. Appreciate the comments there, Pound for Pound. The one thing I want to mention, how he mentions that there's 14 Europeans there. We were gonna bring this up on a previous podcast, but there is a list of ships that have been found sunken throughout Tongatapu and Hapai and Vava'u. Throughout Tonga, there are European ships that were sunken and burned and abandoned, just like the Port-au-Prince. So yes, it could have been multiple people additionally saved on the Port-au-Prince, or it could be people who running away for bad behavior, or survivors of other European ships that were saved, just like Tokiukamea William Mariner saved. So that's another interesting thing, is the Port-au-Prince was not a one-off. It looks like this was a relatively common practice with the Tongans and possibly throughout all Polynesia for who knows how many other ships were raided and burnt throughout Polynesia.
They get there, and 8 of them are armed with muskets. We already know that there are 8 Hawaiians there that know how to use muskets because they used muskets in Hawaii. The High Chief Kamehameha had muskets.
And also remember, these quote-unquote Hawaiians had no issue communicating with the Tongans. And when the Samoans were there, no issue. That just goes to why Captain Cook identified Polynesia as a nation. I know there's a lot of people out there. It's like, oh, that's silly. Oh, a Polynesian nation. Well, guess what, man? When I was a kid, everybody said it was silly that Polynesians could navigate with the stars, that we were massive navigators. They were, oh, that's stupid. Oh, they blah, blah, blah. So when people say, oh, there was no Polynesian nation, there was no uniformity of government and religion and governance, please forgive me when I say sure, but I'm just going to move forward with what I believe, because you're asking me to ignore all the evidence that not just I see, but what Captain Cook saw, what William Mariner saw, and what a lot of other people saw as well. Comment here from Facebook. Loma Uhila, Malo, thank you for joining, Loma. Malo Toko Polynation. So what would this look like in numbers? Tonga, to be specific, how many people would be living at Tonga at the time? That's a very interesting question, Loma, because two things. A lot of the observations before Tonga kind of falls into civil war was how well cultivated the land was. Right? So for how well and how cultivated the land, that leads to big questions, right? How big were these populations? We've gone over some of the studies that have been done on settlements on Tongatapu, kind of in that Toloa, Fuamotu area, where they've already identified that there was urbanization on Tongatapu, right? 700 years earlier, or at least a settlement, we're very close to one of the Tuitonga settlements, has low density urbanization. It has hundreds of mounds spread out. I mean, right now there's 100,000 people in Tonga, right? 60 something thousand on Tongatapu. I wouldn't be surprised at the height of the Tuitonga it was higher than that, just because of the quality of the life that seems to have existed, how peaceful, the stability that the Tuitonga political structure provided meant there was very little war, very organized political, social, religious structure. So that allows populations to thrive, right? And another thing to another testament to that is you look at the ruins. You look at the Tuitonga's residences, that 10,000 plus mounds they found throughout Tongatapu. That is high population density. So, I mean, I would say it wouldn't be, for me, out of this world if it was over 100,000 people on Tongatapu itself at some point at the height. So, and then when you're looking at throughout Polynesia, right now in Samoa, between the Samoas, there's like what, 4 to 500,000 people there, roughly, right? I mean, you're looking at a nation that had millions of people, a couple million people, right? It's nothing to spit at, to use a famous Texas phrase. Ukuidai joining in from Facebook says, George Vason's book, 4 Years in Tongatapu, there were a runaway Palangis who lied to the Tongans. There has got to be other Palangi runaways in Tonga at that time. George Vason was there before Mariner, early 1800s. Exactly. There's runaways. And like I mentioned, who knows how many other ships were raided, scrapped the metal out of there. People were saved just like William Mariner was saved. And additional follow-up comment Pramukus's London Missionary Society missionary George Vason. Yep, he has a great book. Another great option outside from William Mariner to observe the ancient behavior of Tongans in the 1800s or 19th century. So, yeah, I mean, and then we look at, I mean, just the reason why, if people say, oh, that's crazy, that this stuff is like, oh, so many people, to us crazy, thinking there were hundreds of thousands on Tongatapu. Look at the 100 acres of man-made land in the Fonuatano. Look at all the langis, not just on Tongatapu, but throughout Polynesia. Look at the Ha'amonga. Look at the tens of thousands of man-made earth mounds. And that's the stuff that we can still see today. Who knows what else was made back then out of wood or more perishable structures. So yeah, to me, I think we're severely underestimating the population sizes on Tongatapu and throughout Polynesia. G-Thing, Esafings, appreciate it. Toko Malo, Tu'itong Empire is real. Mo OGs told me this way back in the days. Malo, love this YouTube channel. Appreciate it, G-Thing. Appreciate the support and 100%, right? I mean, everybody recognizes Tu'itong is undeniable, the influence and the vast empire that was built with it. I think anyone who's willing to be objective can't get around that. We may disagree on other things, on the Tu'imanua and the Tu'ipulotu or Tu'ifisi, whatever you want to call it, where they existed. But there's one thing that Polynesia universally accepts, and that's the Tu'itonga Empire. So appreciated that.
So now you have 8 Palangis, 8 Hawaiians with muskets. They pull in the entire fleet. If you can imagine, 170 canoes and a few giant canoes. And there were 4 cannons mounted on 4 of the giant ones, and they pull in to Nuku'alofa, where the entire fortress, and I described it in chapter 3, the entire fortress was made of a giant ditch, 12 to 15 feet deep, and then a giant bamboo wall made out of post, latched with bamboo around it. And on the other side of that first wall is another giant ditch with another latching with posts of bamboo all the way around it, right? He said it was about 5 or so acres big, this entire fortress, Nuku'alofa Fortress.
These are compounds.
And it was 15 feet tall. It had platforms every 15 to 20 feet where people can stand, and a little blocking area where people can throw spears or stones or whatever down. And so Nuku'alofa was ready. They pull in, the entire fleet pulls in. Mariner and his 3 friends, they man the cannons, right? So they're pulling in, and the Englishmen and the Hawaiians start firing muskets at all the warriors standing in front of the fortress of the Nuku'alofa Fortress, right? And they're pulling in. And these guys are throwing spears at them, and they're doing whatever they can, and they're pulling up, shooting them, right? And they kill 3 of them, and they injure a few of them, but war has begun as they pull into Nuku'alofa, right? The injured guys, once they got injured, they start pulling them into the fortress. And a lot of them start running because they don't know what these things are. The guns or the bullets are hitting them, and they're running back into the fortress, right? They start panicking and whatnot. And Mariner said that
this is probably what Ulukalala was thinking, right? With getting William Mariner, keeping him in and observing the technology. He's been trying to push more influence onto Tongatapu unsuccessfully for multiple years. And now with this technology, it's really turning the tide. Not too different from, Kamehameha observing that the muskets, that's how he was able to unify the Hawaiian Islands, was leveraging the knowledge and the technology to allow him to take control over Hawaii. So we're seeing a similar thing here in Tonga.
Most of them ran in, but 40 of the bravest guys just stood right in front of where the beach is, waiting for the canoes to get there to fight.
Yeah, see, this is the challenge here of not doing this for the love of the game. Is we don't quite have the paid version for YouTube, but we'll have some discussion on the background as this commercial works through. But this is definitely an interesting time with Tonga. It's there is a lot of frustration with the Tuikanuku and the oppression that they're feeling. There seems to be a divide, right, of all this power, this influence that's coming from Ha'amoa for the Tuikanuku, and it almost seems like the Tuikanuku has stationed certain people on Ha'apai and Vava'u who have a loyalty to him, which would make sense. But when war breaks out, they flee to Ha'amoa. And then Tonga is still right fragmented. Tonga Tapu, I mean. Tonga Tapu's fragmented. You have a fort there in Nuku'alofa. There's, Pea and all these other places. So there's a bunch of Kolotaus there. But it is not a unified. It's destabilized government, and there's chaos. And so now you're getting all these warrings that are going on, trying to bring back or people trying to vie for power that comes out of that chaos. So let's come back here and get this rolling again.
While they're pulling in and shooting and whatnot, eventually they get onto the beach and they start fighting on the beach. You have the people with the guns and then the warriors in front of them fighting, eventually beating them back into the fortress. Now everybody's in Nuku'alofa now. The Nuku'alofa guys have ran back into the fortress and they've closed the doors. As I've said before, the doors were giant doors and they're made out of.
I find it interesting, Dylan. You see 179 canoes coming in, right? And you leave 40 guys out in the front. Wonder what the thinking behind that was. Is that just like, a little challenge? Just to kind of spite them in their faces, like, we're not scared of you. Come here, let's just duke it out. But 40 guys is not going to stop 170 plus canoes with, hundreds of warriors on it. So I find that a little interesting in the tactics. Wonder what's the driver behind that behavior. If it's just, the warrior spirit, it'd be rude not to welcome you. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yeah, comment here from T Style. It's like their millionth time building those forts. Well, and that's the advantage of the materials that they're using, right? Earth, you can repair it. It's quick to repair using the bamboo and so forth. So yeah, and it sounds like they were expecting these guys to come. There's like the season of war. It's like ancient Israel, right? When David, there's the season of wars, and David should have been out fighting in the war season. No, for siya now, instead of going to war, got himself in trouble. But it looks like everyone was expecting Ulukalala and Tuponiwa to come. So yeah, they're rebuilding that stuff for the millionth time, like you said.
Coconut trees cut in half, stacked on top of each other, and they slide back and forth like this, and they slid it. And now they're shooting arrows from the outside and stones from the inside. I mean, while the war was going on, while the battle was going on, they start taking the cannons out of the giant canoes, putting them onto the ground and mounting the cannons onto the wheels. So they pull it on and they set it on into the water, but on the shallow part of the reef, and they pull in close as they possibly can to the fortress. Now, a chair brought off of the Port-au-Prince was set back far enough back behind everything, behind the warriors, where the beach was. You have the warriors right here with the cannons now set and all the canoes set, and then behind them in the water, in the shallow part of the reef, they set a big chair there that they brought off the Port-au-Prince for Finau to sit in, so that he's not close to the war, so that he's not close to the battle, he doesn't get hurt. They have him back there. And then everybody else. So if I was on the beach, Finau would be sitting back on a shallow part of the reef in a chair to watch what's going on, right? And now the carronades are set, the mini cannons are set. Now they start firing into Nuku'alofa.
Dang.
Arrows are coming out of Nuku'alofa, stones.
Sounds to me like if they didn't understand that these smaller cannons were coming, they should have. If they understood this, they would have made their full stand maybe on the land, because once the cannons get on, it's pretty much game over for them. But obviously, I don't think they knew what was coming.
Whatever else is coming out, and they're basically watching, dodging, and the front guys were being protected. The Palang guys that were manning the cannons, including Mariner, was being protected by the warriors that were standing in front of them. They're basically shooting things out while they start shooting the cannons in. And they stand there and they're shooting cannons. They're shooting muskets. They're shooting cannons into Nuku'alofa now, right? And this goes on for about an hour or so, to the point where now not that many arrows were coming out. So they knew that it was working. But Finau, sitting so far back in the chair, can't tell that the fortress was being damaged at all, because of the way that bamboo was made. It wasn't, it didn't explode. When you shoot through it, it was tied together. So the balls went in, but
Structures didn't collapse.
You couldn't tell whether anything was being destroyed or not. So he's disappointed. Now Finau's sitting back there like, all right, what's going on? You can't tell.
Finau's like, Shanna, you told me this was going to win the war for me, and we've been blasting it for an hour. And it's surprisingly durable, right? From the outside, it looks like it's not doing damage. But people inside are probably freaking out because they have no idea what these giant black rocks, right, rather than the cannonballs, they're probably freaking out on the inside, like, what kind of voodoo is this? And Ulukalala is thinking, like, man, I thought this was the year, but looks like he's going to be pleasantly surprised.
That anything's happening, even though the guys up front know that there aren't any more arrows or stones coming out. And he calls Mariner back to him. He tells him, hey, go call Toki back here. I want to talk to him. So Mariner comes back there, and Finau tells him, look, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed. I can't tell that anything's happened. Nothing's going on. Now everybody's standing around, and these cannons are just shooting because they've been firing for over an hour at this point. And Mariner tells him, no, they're the bamboo, it's hard to tell sitting from back here, but because of how the bamboo, it doesn't explode, it doesn't give way, right? Because of the way it's made. But
and it's light. The bamboo's light, even if it's damaged, it's not heavy enough.
So we know that it's working. So Finau says, all right, burn it down. Have guys go around and start burning the outside wall down so that at least he can see. So they start going around and burning the outside wall, and they're going in and they're trying to burn the inside wall as well. And when they get close, they can tell that the cannons went through the posts. The posts are damaged. Even though they're tied together all the way up, some of the posts were missing down below because of how the cannons hit them. And they get in close enough to now they're fighting the enemy, start seeing that they're coming in close. So now the enemies are coming, and now they're fighting as they're burning these down, burning the fortress, the wall down. Nuku'alofa guys start coming and they start fighting them. But by then, many have gone out the back gate and ran to the next village south of them. Yeah, man. They're probably freaking out. What the heck is this stuff going on? A lot of them, when the cannon started, the gunfire started, a lot of them opened the back gate and they started running out the back. And they didn't know that until they got close enough to realize that a lot of them were running out the back and escaped. So they set a bunch of men back there, but by this time, the cannons are only shooting blanks. So just like, I know if you've been in Tonga, but Fanapitu, how they just make the noise. Now they're just firing the cannons without shooting anything out of it so that they don't hit any one of their guys. So they have a bunch of guys set out back for anybody who tries to escape out back. And Mariner said they were placed there to start knocking brains out. Oh, that was their job. As soon as somebody shows up, they're to take their club and knock their heads open, split their heads, right? And once they figured out and found out that a lot of them were gone, and there were only the injured and whatnot that was in there, they start going in and giving the inside of the fortress battle, inside of Nuku'alofa. And now they're just going in and killing. They start killing.
They're just going in there and starting to kill people, right? I mean, they were dead the moment those cannons hit the shores. That's really what it came down to, man. Like I said, I don't know what the thinking was with the 40 warriors welcoming party. Should have been 400, if not everybody should have been out there to meet Ulukalala, because once those cannons hit the ground, oh, sí, that's the end. Ya se acabó todo, como dicen, right? So, very interesting. Ulukalala is going through a range of emotions now, high emotion, visiting his dad. Seems like there was some kind of desire to unite Tonga again, a vision maybe we shared with his father. Who knows what's the storyline there? Should make some movies out of this stuff. Then they coming on to fight, gets the cannons, boom, 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 all kinds of noise and so forth. Seems disappointed. Then next minute he finds out, he's already won the war when he thought he didn't see anything happen. So this is really a swinging of emotions and momentum.
But while the cannons are going off on the beach, they start killing everybody, man, woman, and child. Everybody starts going in. He said that the men still war whooped, right? The warriors went in war whooping, but the men that were in there injured, women were laying with them and, holding their men and their children. And the warriors themselves that were on the ground, they were still war whooping against them and, yelling back and forth at them. Some of the women were screaming, some of the children were screaming, and Hapai and Vavao guys were going in and they were just start slaughtering.
Can you imagine that? I mean, that's like samurai level stuff, right? I mean, just imagine cannon shoot through, blows your legs off, cuts you in half. Your wife and kids are next to you, and what are you doing? You're still over there calling people to come fight you, right? I mean, that's intense. That's a certain level of warrior mentality, the Tui Halafatai switch. That's just I'm a believer in this, man. Polynesians have that Tui Halafatai switch genetically implanted. And if we don't teach our people, boys and girls, how to control it, this is why we get ourselves into so much trouble. In other parts of life and society and in foreign nations, it's because, whether you want to call it hot blood, warrior spirit, whatever it is, that's something that'll come out. And when it comes out, that's what we call Mishini Mau Mau. So hearing this, it's really is a warlike mentality that injury, death, suffering, all of that is thrown out the window, and it's just the heat of the battle.
Everybody. Men are groaning, dying ones. And then he even said that there were women that were in there that were just holding their men and holding their children, but they were looking at the warriors as if they were annoyed, like, hurry up and kill me. Like, what are you going to do? They weren't giving, the women weren't giving them the satisfaction of yelling too much once the warriors approached them. They were almost annoyed that they were even there. So like it wasn't, the women didn't care. They knew they were going to die. They had their husband and their child in hand, but Mariner said that they looked more like whatever, They were
telling you, man, it's dangerous.
They were even there. They didn't care.
And that type of personality and so forth still exists to today. That's the one thing that is really kind of interesting to me, is as we kind of listen to these behaviors and attitudes hundreds of years ago, many generations ago. But then when you look back at your life growing up and your friends and your cousins and stuff, and you're like, so much has changed, but so much is still the same, right? This is interesting.
Just so that they don't give them the satisfaction of fear. Like, you may kill me, but you're not going to conquer me that way. I'm not going to be afraid of you. That's what, that's what I understood of what he was saying. He was saying that while he was watching, it didn't seem like, yeah, women screamed and whatnot, but some of them were like, no, you're not going to. Don't think that just because you're killing me that I'm afraid of you. That's the look that he was getting from the women, which tells you the I guess the ferociousness of all these people, and how even till death they weren't going to allow you to think that they were scared of you. Mariner acknowledged the fierceness of the
Yeah, and that's a thing. I don't know if that's actually William Mariner does a interesting comparison between his time in excuse me, his description of the Fijian warrior versus the Polynesian warrior per se. Is he said that the Fijian warriors were much more ferocious, right? They looked ferocious, they behaved ferocious, but what he described, in their everyday Fijian warrior, everything was about being ferocious and being intimidating, in being, kind of like chaotic or just ferocious, right? But he said what he noticed the difference was in Tonga was, yeah, they have an unconquerable spirit, but there was a desire of, you get up every day, you dress yourself, you make yourself very presentable, clean, organized, put together. If you want to say gentlemanlike or womanly, like in the sense of women taking care of themselves and their hygiene and so forth. Very different from what he experienced in Fiji. And so it is like, that's why I like the samurai maybe comparison, because the samurai were very particular on structure, organization, cleanliness, presentation, making one presentable, but were pretty ruthless when it was in war, like unconquerable spirit and so forth. So I see a lot of similarities on the samurai and the Polynesian position on war, and being a warrior, yet having very structured and very presentable manner on the social side of things.
conquerors now. And then once they're in there, they call for the newly tattooed guys, the young kids, right? 15, 16, 17-year-olds, newly tattooed, right?
Oh, I guess we get a pause there. And for all that humlala about, the malu and tattooing being only owned by certain people in Polynesia, yeah, there was tattooing going on, right? Very common. It's kind of silly to say that one part of Polynesia owns tattooing. This is a common practice amongst all of our ancestors.
Because in the second volume, it tells why they were all tattooed the same way, right? Because they were to look the same. That's why they called it da da da. The newly tattooed kids, they called them in to start practicing how to knock a brain out of a man's skull. So they got the kids in there,
getting the young warriors to get their reps in, basically, in what you're doing to. And also, I think it's to build that feeling of invincibility and in getting over the newness of war. And so that's something that, that's a smart move. You gotta, when you're building a warrior, this is kind of on the ugly, not so pretty parts of being a warrior and building an army who's experienced in fighting. Hey, Mike's Oxmal says, Malo whakahule tau historia whakafonua, tawola me honongaohi, le soni moyanga whakatonga. 100% Mike, appreciate it, malo abito.
and now they're walking through, and it was.
So this book called Six Figures from
We're
Scratch
going
is designed to keep
pause that real quick and talk about it. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why Mike, with going with your comment, one of the drivers behind the podcast here is, at the very least, have more people have conversations, have discussions. The more you talk about it, the more you think about it, the more you look into it, the truth will reveal itself, right? and the truth will set you free, as they say. Obviously, on the podcast we have our perspectives on the Polynesian nation, the Tongan Empire, what the capital, the origins of Polynesia, from our perspective. Others have theirs. We can have these ideas compete, but at the end of the day, who's right, who's wrong? No one's always right, no one's always wrong. But having these discussions allows us to, at the very least, eliminate bad ideas. And unfortunately, we see and hear a lot of bad ideas of what our history is, where we come from, what our ancestors were able to accomplish. And those bad ideas proliferate a little too much. So at the very least, through the podcast and through our discussions, if we only achieve the slaughtering of bad ideas, that would be well worth it from our perspective here on the Polynesian Eyes podcast.
Child, kill everybody, anybody you see that's alive. And perhaps some of them went in there that didn't want to kill a live person, probably practice on a dead person. I mean, that's what I would do, because I don't know.
Yeah, you got to get it out of your system. I mean,
but I can only imagine going in there. But that's just the way it was back then. Come and practice. Your turn. That one right there. Go. You know what I'm saying? It's crazy. But they treat it like it was nothing, right? It's almost as if, because when I first got to Tonga, that's how they trained me to chase pigs down, because I've never chased a pig down. I'm from America. It's like, here, go.
Clyde Moore says no more Ufi Mounds. We'll visit the Ufi Mounds when we can.
Yeah, because we want to eat it. Go chase it down and hold it. And when it starts screaming, you're like, I don't know if I really want to do this. That's how I felt when I went from here chasing a pig down. I can't imagine how growing up, but I do understand that.
Gotta get the reps in.
That's what
maybe ugly, but you gotta get the reps in.
It was just normal. Hey, the newly tattooed guys, come over here. Start doing this.
Earn your tattoos.
Even as they went in, they even noticed. All right, a lot of them were just laying there awaiting death. It was hard. It was hard for him to really contemplate as he walked through Nuku'alofa and understand. Like the picture was horrible. It was terrible, because they took cannon fire, they took musket fire, and now they're taking
probably all over the place,
clubs and spears. And every house that wasn't burning, they plundered. They went in there and took whatever they can, whether it's weapons or food or whatever else was in there. One of the Fijians, one of Finau's men, one of the Fijian guys, he made a breastplate out of something he found on the Port-au-Prince, but it was used to strain fish, right? So
we have people from Hamoa, we have Hawaiians, we have Europeans, we have people from Hawaii, and now Fijians, right? We are having a diverse population going on here. So I'm not aware, and maybe if you guys are aware of other accounts throughout Polynesia, that it is so common to have a variety of different people moving about or being collected throughout Polynesia in those areas. Yeah, I'd be interested to know if, how common that was.
So it is of thick netting and latchet, and so he put it on himself, and it was at least protective around, but right in the middle was that strainer part, right? Well, he took a spear right to the chest plate. When one of them threw a spear out, or threw a spear at him, he took one of them to the chest, and it messed him up really bad. Mariner said he laid up for 8 months, and ever since then, his walking, he was always hunched down ever since then. One of the Fijian guys with a breastplate. So I don't know why he mentioned that, but it was interesting. Fijians were there. So in a few hours, the great fortress of Nuku'alofa, which patterned a lot of the fortresses in Tonga at that time, and fought off Ulukalala for the past 11 plus years, right? Because Ulukalala was going and attacking Nuku'alofa and all the other forces, the fortresses annually, right? In a few hours was now completely destroyed. So for the past 11 years, they were able to protect it, but because they went in with the cannons and the guns and everything else, it was completely destroyed. A lot of the patterns of the other fortresses were built the same because it was so built, fortified so well. So now Finau walks through the Nuku'alofa fortress, and he sees what it's done. He sees how destroyed it is. He walks through and he sees limbs, arms, legs,
All
body
over.
parts blown away by the cannons. He sees their giant canoes, and he was shattered to pieces, right? Amazed and astonished at the damage that the cannons did, to the point where he almost felt sick to see this type of damage. Mariner said there was 350 plus bodies just laying around in pieces. Also with the young men going in and practicing battle. Finau expressed his amazement.
I find that a little interesting that bothered him. I just wonder if in his mind he's like, well, what's the point of taking over this fort if it's all damaged? All the ships are damaged, everybody's dead. The fort itself is, indefensible in many ways. So yeah, I won the battle, but is it really, I don't really have much to gain from it. Maybe that's where his kind of disgust and maybe, in his mind, because they don't have any problem of, using the survivors as target practice. So it's not the carnage, I don't think. I think it's him just looking at, well, what's left? Is this really, what do I have to gain from this? So I find that interesting. He's obviously not bloodthirsty, right? He's not finding joy in just the carnage and the blood. But in a way, he's kind of just like, oh my gosh, the destruction is kind of out of control. Maybe that's what he's thinking. So I find that very interesting that he's not just running around shouting for joy that, 10 years of efforts and, finally broken through. He's still somewhat dissatisfied with the victory because of the damage and the carnage that it led to.
About the guns, he expressed how astonished it was at the damage these things could do. Because remember, he sat all the way in the back. He couldn't even see what they were doing. But walking through Nuku'alofa at this point in time, he was blown away at the damage that something like this can do. They captured some enemies. Some of the higher chiefs, they ended up not killing, right? Some of the enemies they took prisoners.
Quick comment here from Matafa Usomalo. Thank you for stopping by. I think he felt guilty for the unfair advantage, like in the last samurai when they pitied the samurai in the end. And I think so too, right? Like when you do have a warrior mentality, there seems to be a code of ethics and expectation of how war is to be conducted and how that should be executed. Maybe that's a big part of it too, Mataf. I wouldn't be surprised, right? Where they're like, there's no sport in this, there's no fun in this because it's so one-sided. So yeah, that could be it as well. I appreciate that, Malo Matafa.
And once they took them prisoners and set them down and whatnot, everything was done, the battle was done. The warriors start talking to them. They start talking to each other. The Nuku'alofa guys and the Hapaiwa guys started talking to each other, and the Hapai guys were like, what did it look like? How did it look like when you were in here?
Now that the war is over and we're not blowing limbs off, can you guys tell me how it was in here? That is absolutely hilarious, man. It's like the two kids in the village, Tautuki, they're punching each other, and going to kill each other. But after the fight, sit down. They say, hey, how did you feel when I kicked you in the face? And the other guy, oh, how did it feel when I bit you on the arm? It's kind of hilarious. I mean, these are things that there's no quote unquote bloodthirsty hatred, so to speak. But but as shown by some of the warriors and the women, there is no submission either, right? So this is it's a weird kind of dynamic that we're seeing from how people are behaving in the conversations and how, the topics are switching now that the war is basically over.
And they all start describing like, man, dude, whatever that was that you guys used, it was like an animal, like a fierce animal, because all we knew that we were now in our houses and we thought we were safe, but these cannonballs came in and
Hey everybody, it's Tony Robbins. Listen, I'm on my way to the
that's pretty
studio and
funny. I just find that a little kind of ironic that now they're having these conversations after the fact. There's like, hey, now that we're not trying to kill each other, man, what was it like? Because we've never experienced it. Can you tell me? It's like they're trying to ask them to tell them the movie preview of the movies.
out a post in a corner of our house. I'm like, oh snap! And it seemed like when it took the post out, it turned mid-flight and took out another post, right? Because we all know that it was just 4 of them going, and so that's not what was happening. But this is how they expressed it, how they explained it. That's what it felt. It felt like they were coming in and they were turning, looking for us, and we were backing and we were trying to find a place to hide from them. Because that's what they're describing it, as if it was an animal looking for something to eat.
See, and this is just human nature, right? When you don't understand what's happening, you just correlate or relate it to, oh, maybe it's an animal we just don't understand. Maybe it's a devil, maybe it's a ghost, and it's trying to attack us and it's moving wildly around. So they're just trying to see what they can correlate it to or associate with it to explain the behavior of the cannonballs.
And it was destroying and devouring everything, and we thought that it was only satisfied by human flesh. That's what we thought, right? Amazing. We saw it take out the giant canoes. We started taking the other canoes, shattering them to pieces, because we thought that all they wanted to do was
Eat flesh.
devour flesh. So we started hiding. A lot of them started leaving. At some point, some of the chiefs decided, you know what, because they were on top of the giant canoes, and they met there like, all right, they're looking over the wall like, all right, let's go. Why don't we just run over there, jump over, and kill the white guys that are manning the cannons?
Yeah.
Let's do that. That way, those things stop working, and then we can just go hand-to-hand combat. And while they were planning that on top of these giant canoes, the cannons start hitting the canoes and shattering them, and they start falling down. And
so it looks like there is an adjustment that's being made by the leadership in the Nuku'alofa fort. They have an understanding from their observations what's causing it, and they're trying to come up with a plan, but too late. That plan probably would have given them a fighting chance, but the cannon damage and the consistency of the firing just totally demolishes any opportunity for an adjustment. No second half adjustments, guys. Sorry, too late.
that changes the entire plan. Now they're not going to do that because they can't see anymore now, and now the plan that shattered the plan, right? No pun intended.
There we go.
Most of them run into the country and whatnot, and now the prisoners that they have, everybody else is dead. The young, newly tattooed guys are got their practice in, and they burn the entire thing down. Finau decides to now leave and go back to Pangaimotu, that place that's a mile away from north of Nuku'alofa, that's separated by a narrow reef, because now he's sickened by the entire thing, and for some reason he was done. He's like, all right, we're done. Let's go to Pangaimotu, make our way back home. Mariner tells him, no, you want to rule all of Tonga, right? The only way that's going to happen is if we move this battle with these weapons and go to the next fortress and do the same thing. You have to do the same thing, right? He said there was 15 or 12 or more fortresses in Tonga at this point. You have to do this. You've been trying this for 11 years, failing. Now that we have something that destroyed the strongest fortress, you can now go and rule all of Tonga through battle if you want. But you have to keep going. You can't stop here. We can't go back to Pangaimotu. And Finau says, nah, I'm done. This isn't how, because he felt like this just isn't how we fight. This is not fair. It's not fair to a man or to warriors to be receiving this type of treatment, because
it's just,
think that,
what's the point?
That man should have this much advantage over another. That's not the warrior way, right? And Mariner thought, well, and this is just what Mariner thought. Mariner just thought, well, you're just not a real warrior then. Because if you really want to rule, if you really want to conquer, which we already know that Mariner knows and understands how conquering happens because he was educated in England.
Yeah.
He knows how conquering is supposed to happen. You're supposed to go in and take over, and put people there and then take over and make sure that everybody is under your rule. But Finau didn't think that that was the case. Finau didn't think that that was the way or wasn't the Tongan way. And so Mariner just thought, okay, well then you ain't that guy. Right?
Yeah. And, Matafa here has a comment where he says, what separates minorities from Palangis is empathy. And, well, and the thing is like, very interesting exchange there, right? So there's this massive victory, right? By all Western, key performance indicators, KPIs. Ulukalala is smashing it, right? Like 11 years of failure done in a couple hours. Tongatapu could be all his within a few days, maybe a couple weeks, right? But Ulukalala doesn't see it that way, and I don't know if empathy is necessarily the correct word there in my thoughts, Mataafas, because how much empathy do you have when you're out there slaughtering women and children who are next to their fathers or husbands, right? And then bringing the survivors and having the young warriors practice with them. A lot of Palangis would look at that and say, oh, that's so savage, right? But then this is kind of perplexing and interesting because what's kind of coming to my mind is this. The question that very few people ask themselves when they want something or to achieve something, or when they're given something and accepting it, is the implications of what's happening. And what I'm saying is like this. You want to be successful. You want to accomplish a great feat. Well, great. Usually what I try to ask myself is, of course I want to be successful. I want to accomplish a great thing. But because we know there's always a cost to everything, the natural question we should all ask ourselves is, hey, yeah, I'm going to win and take over Tongatapu, but at what cost? And is the cost worth it to me? And it seems like what Ulukalala is looking at is he sees what can be obtained, which is something he's been trying to obtain, but he is not satisfied with the cost at which it comes. And it's a cost that he's not going to pay personally or physically, but it is a cost of damage and chaos that he's like, I don't know if it's worth it, right? I don't know if it's worth blowing things up just to be the king over rubble, right? Is it really worth killing half the population just to be the king? Maybe he's saying, nah, not really, right? And so, because anyone who is thinking through a Western mentality of conquering, like William Mariner, is like, yep, on to the next. Ulukalala seems to be thinking at a higher level, in my opinion. He's thinking, no, I'm just not going to achieve my goal at all costs. He's saying there is a price that's too high for me to achieve my goal, and that is the complete destruction of people, property that I'm not willing to pay for. Or at least at the moment, he's saying, I'm not satisfied with the price that's being exacted to win, or at least to win in this manner. So I think it's very interesting, and that's why it's important to stop and think and ponder, and why is Ulukalala behaving this way? We understand William Mariner's, right? Because that's a very straightforward Westerner way of conquering. You just go and whatever it takes to win. Boom. This is one of the reasons why I think Polynesians in general, we struggle with achieving material success because of the cost that it requires to obtain material success. The Polynesian mindset, and this may be because of how the Polynesian Empire was governed and maintained, it wasn't always maintained by military force. It was governed through relationship, family relationship, right? An exchange, a social contract, so to speak, of I wasn't just a ruler for the sake of being a ruler, but I had a responsibility and a task to give to my people, and my people had a responsibility and a task to give to me. And there was an exchange that was made that made the ruling worth it. The sacrifice of the ruler for the people and the sacrifice of the people for the ruler. That made sense. For the Polynesian mind, from my observations and experience, what is asked in order to achieve material success is not always worth it to the Polynesian mind. It is a total abandonment of communal living and a heavy focus on individualistic goals and desires. And that's the price of achieving quote unquote material success, right? I need to sacrifice everything outside of myself to achieve my material success. When the Polynesian mentality, in many ways, and I can only say just because this is how our ancestors lived, breathed, behaved, and executed their lives for thousands and thousands of years, is the attainment of individual goal at the price of the communal and the overall vision is not an exchange that the Polynesian mindset is usually happy with. And I'm just speaking in generalities, right? That seems to be what Ulukalala is going through right now. Because from a very Western perspective, you just achieved all your individual goals. You're now the man. You can, you have Hapai, you have Vava'u. Tongatapu is at your fingertips to achieve that individual power and goal. And yet he says, no. Something is not right with this exchange. And so he seems to be uneasy. That's maybe why he wants to withdraw. He's probably asking himself, is the cost of achieving my control over Tongatapu worth the achievement of that individual goal? I don't know. So it's kind of differently. Thinking of that, I'm trying to understand and walk through why this behavior, because this is unusual behavior, right? When we think, and this is where I'm going to, guys, this is why I think our Polynesian history brings a unique perspective into the world. And this world is, and I appreciate Western civilization, right? It's brought so many material advancements, so many material things that, in healthcare, education, but it comes at certain costs. And what are those costs? The metaphysical world, right? The communal focus. Some of those things are lost. But I want to get through some of the comments here. Mataafa says, it's like when our dads used to savagely beat us, then empathetically talk to us after. And it's funny, right, Mataafa, where, from the Western perspective, it's like that first part of your comment, they're like, what savages, right? And I would probably agree if you just left it that way with that portion, right? And you're just kind of beating people around for the sake of beating them. But it's that second half of your comment, Mataafa, that to me shows a level of understanding that supersedes just the material analysis. And that is the talking to after the fact, the reinforcing of what matters most. That suffering that you're going through now is not suffering to be wasted. You've gone through some suffering. Let's make the suffering worth it, right? And maybe that's what Ulukalala is seeing. He's like, I'm seeing all this suffering, and a certain level of suffering is worth it, and a certain level of damage and chaos is worth it. But this is suffering, chaos, and damage at a level that he may be doubting whether it's worth that kind of chaos. So appreciate that, Mataafa. Clyde Moore says he's a general, not a conqueror. And I think that's an important thing. That's an important distinction. He's not out. He is not someone who desires chaos. He may desire influence and power, but it doesn't come at any price, right? He's saying there's a price or a line I'm willing to go to. And if it passes that line or that price, I have the self-control to step back and reanalyze the situation and make a decision on whether my behavior is appropriate in regards to the big picture, and not just tunnel vision on my goal and willing to step over and kick anyone and everything to destruction. T-Style says, I would say it's more principles on Ulukalala's part. Yeah, and that's what's kind of interesting, right? The T-Style is there are certain principles, and that's why I think it's important to stop and really think through this, because there seems to be, some principles of knocking people's brains out. Oh, that's not a big enough thing to be concerned about. But looking at the cumulative effect of the destruction, there are principles there. So there are things that he's looking. Let me put it this way. There's the micro and the macro. It seems like on the micro individual level, Ulukalala doesn't seem to be doesn't get too carried away with those. But at a macro level, at a 30,000 foot level, the forest, the forest amongst the trees, he has some kind of vision or principle-driven action for that. Now, chopping down an individual tree that he doesn't like or think is blah, 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 no issue. But when he zooms out on a macro level, that seems to be where he has a lot of his perspective driven from. Another comment here, Mataafa says 100% on the individualisms of the West, contrary to a communal culture. 100%. I think this is why it's sometimes hard for our people. And I don't, and I'm not even saying that it's a bad thing to have as a challenge, right? Maybe attaining material success is not the greatest thing in the world to have if it comes at the cost of the family, right? There is a heavy perspective in the Polynesian mind. The material is to serve and achieve the family or the communal goals, and not the family to serve the acquiring of communal or material goals and wealth. And maybe that's where Ulukalala's mind is going, is yes, we're trying to consolidate power and unify my political and military power, but at what cost? Is the damage that I'm inflicting a reasonable price for the goal that I'm trying to achieve? Mika Losiale, Malo, Toko, have you had a look at Non-Madal, the lost city of Micronesia? Just the fact they use kava as well. No, I have not, Mika. And maybe that's something we can dig into on a future episode. I appreciate you bringing that up. Non-Madal. I've never even heard of it. But that's interesting. Malo, Mika, for bringing that up. We're getting close to the end here. So let's plow through this.
So anyways, they gather whatever prisoners they had left, they gathered and they sailed to Pangaimoto. That's part 1 of chapter 4. And I'm only dropping this just because I know it's been a while, but I want to kind of get back into it. That's just part 1. Chapter 4, there's a few more parts, and you'll get my commentary along with the story and along with how I envisioned what would have happened and it just blows my mind. There's a lot more, right? There's a lot more, and there's a lot of details that I think that Mariner just mentioned, but didn't really know from a Tongan's perspective. Even though by then he was practically Tongan, but a lot of things we didn't know, right? 15 Palangis were at this war, right? There were 8 Hawaiians were at this war.
Fijians.
There was Fijians that were at this war. When we talk about battles in Tonga, we don't think that anybody else was there, but yeah, there were more people there than we think, or than we thought, or than we were ever educated or knew about. And so grateful for Mariner for sharing the story. That was part 1. I'll be back with part 2. Like I said, I'm really busy working here at this restaurant here, and I'm just here sharing what I can at the time that I do have. That's why I'm doing it here. Anyways, that's chapter 4, part 1. Stay tuned for the part 2. I'll try to get it to you as soon as possible. All right.
This is how to get
Very
If you
interesting.
want to drop
Mahalo,
this,
Lolo. Appreciate it. This is a very, very interesting. There's a. I want to come back to. Let me see if I can get to a couple of these pictures here. I really want to get to. Oh no, this is part 2. No wonder why I'm not getting to the pictures I want. Right here. So very interesting. Obviously, these guys, I want to start with this. I mean, look at the shoulders. I mean, obviously, the arms aren't as developed. I think this is the picture of Ulukalala, but a very strong chest. And this could be just what the artist decided to do. But obviously, look at that pronounced shoulder, well-developed shoulder. This is not, or is that William Mariner? No, William Mariner looks different. That's not, so I'm pretty sure that was Ulukalala earlier, but very interesting. Looks like some kind of scar, maybe here. And then I also just wanted to look at William Mariner here. And in this drawing, the things that I just wanted to close out the program today is, as we observe, look at the cleanliness. The organization is grass. It's, how in the world did they cut the grass, keep it clean? And then, the hut, the shape of it, open walls, very similar to what they did in Ha'amoa a lot. And then, looks like hopa plant growing here. And then just look kind of similar to what I mentioned earlier is cleanliness, organized, right? Being presentable. William Mariner has adopted that type of behavior, not just from his time in England, but just living with the Tongans. And having that understanding, expectation that yes, war can be brutal, war can be ferocious, it can be deadly, it can be merciless, but that doesn't mean that we have to live ferociously, right? That we have to live in a manner that type of behavior in battle is what drives us, of being bloodthirsty and not making ourselves pleasant, right? That ability to compartmentalize being ferocious, being, I want to say savage, but being a killer for all intents and purposes. But then to close that up, go back to everyday living, to wake up and make yourself presentable, make yourself pleasant for other people to look at. I think there's a lot to be understood and appreciated from our ancestors, and this is something that I think we can benefit from today, especially for us younger generation, as we try to navigate through the Western culture and civilization, and to do what Ulukalala is doing here, right? We should view our experience in the 21st century, William Mariner being everything that Western culture and civilization makes available to us, right? Just like William Mariner gave Ulukalala access to science, to watches, to cannons, to all these things that can be accessed through the West. That's Western education. That's the corporate structure in the world that's out there. How do we leverage that to our benefit to help us achieve what our goals are and what our desires are? But at the same time, to have the same macro vision, the same awareness that as we are pursuing and navigating these Western goals in the Western world and culture that we live in, that we don't inadvertently leave so much destruction to the values, to the genetic knowledge that's in our blood and in our bones, and our culture and our religion gives us, that we don't just recklessly destroy that and throw it away. And that's something that I think is very intriguing, um, to look and just to stop and think about what's happening with Ulukalala and William Mariner and the foreigners, not just the Westerners, but the Fijians, the Hawaiians, and really wonder like how and why our ancestors behave the way that they behave. And there's a lot to be learned from that. So I thought that was really interesting. Have one more comment here. Mataafa tua, these podcasts have been very informative and entertaining. Malo to you and Masi for all the great work. Appreciate it. Malo abito mataafa. Glad it's of great value to you guys. I'd be lying like today, not feeling 100%. It's been a crazy work week. The whole family's been sick and so forth, but kind of like what Lolo was saying earlier, looks like he was going through a similar thing when in shooting this episode. Just sometimes you just gotta do it, right? Just go out, get it done. And now I'm glad I did it. I would be lying if I said I was excited to be on here today, but it's something that's important. And if something is important and because it's important, sometimes you do it out of duty and not because of pleasure, right? And maybe that's what we're learning today from Ulukalala is he was not overly finding pleasure in the destruction and the temptation of power and subjecting of other people and their material, but there is a sense of duty and a sense of responsibility that we should keep in our mind. I know Mr. Atearoa was going to join us today, but some last minute responsibilities came up, which he was doing what he should be doing, but we appreciate it whenever he's able to join. I want to thank all the fans, all the viewers, appreciate all the comments, all the likes, all the shares on the different platforms, on Facebook, on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. We'll see if Uncle Donald saves TikTok. TikTok is by far where we get the most amount of interaction. But if we end up losing it, we have the other platforms, Facebook and Patreon as well. So with that being said, we are at the top of the hour. Want to thank everyone for joining us. Appreciate all the comments. As always, stay curious, ask the questions, and be bold. Till next time, peace.